Just let me know when you're ready.
Welcome to one more webinar promoted by the Extension Project Internationalization at Home. Thank you all very much for your interest in being part of this event. For those who still don't know me, I'm Professor André Ataide from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, UFMG. I coordinate the Extension Project Internationalization at Home together with Professor Gustavo Teixeira and Professor Giovanni Fonseca, also from UFMG. The students Luiz Fernando Alves from Montes Claros State University, Roger Lafetal, Lara Miranda, and Ana Clara Zamboni from UFMG. We all comprise the organizing committee. As some of you know, the main objective of this project is to deepen the discussion on topics concerning internationalization and related topics entirely in English through webinars open to the public of the UFMG community and also to the public of the external community. You all are welcome. As you know, opportunities to practice English within Brazilian universities are usually focused on reading and text comprehension skills. So this project is also an opportunity for those who also want to practice their listening and speaking skills in English. I take this opportunity to thank you all very much, regardless of your English level, for your interest in practicing your English skills. I hope that all of us spend quality time here over the next couple of hours. Today's presentation is entitled Attracting Top Talent in Your Organization and will be held by Professor Stephanie Thomason. Professor Thomason holds a PhD degree in business administration from Florida Atlantic University in the United States and is a professor of management at the University of Tampa, USA. She specializes in human resource selection and productivity, cross-cultural organization behavior, ethical decision-making, experiential education, and business communication. She has published or presented more than 40 articles in peer-reviewed journals, textbooks, and national and regional conferences. Her publications can be accessed from journals such as Human Resource Management, International Journal of Selection and Assessment, the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology, the International Journal of Productivity and Performance Management, among many others. She has presented numerous times at the Academy of Management annual conferences, along with a variety of other international and regional conferences. So it's really an honor for us to have you here, Professor Thomason, with us today. Uh, After Professor Thomason's presentation, all participants are welcome to participate in the discussion with comments or questions. You may feel free to unmute your microphone, to open your camera, and participate in the discussion. So without further ado, Professor Thomason, thank you very much again for accepting the invitation to talk about this very important topic. Uh, Feel free, you can make your presentation now.
Thank you, Andrea. It's an honor to work with you, and I'm so happy to see you're doing so well at your university as well, and all of the recent publications that you've had. And so, thank you so much. So today we're going to talk a little bit about attracting top talent or attracting the best people, what you can do to attract the best people, some different approaches that are recommended by different people to do that, and the objectives. Can you see the objectives of the session, this slide?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to look at how the mission and vision of an organization, how that should align with hiring. We're going to look at factors that make companies employers of choice to job candidates. We'll recognize the importance of hiring the right candidates in the first place and identifying good selection tools that have been validated to distinguish job candidates. And then we'll look at the personality profiles and some other characteristics of highly engaged employees. So why is hiring the right people key? Why is that important? Well, unfortunately, if you hire the wrong person, it might be very difficult to let them go if they stop performing very well. And of course, we have a history of some toxic bosses. Right here, you have pictured Jeffrey Skilling. He was at Enron and he ended up driving Enron to the ground. And people probably would put him on a dictionary if you look up the corporate psychopath, if you look up what that is. So psychopathy is 1% of the world population, but apparently in organizations, there's a much bigger uh, population of 3% of people who are corporate leaders happen to be psychopaths. Psychopaths know the difference between right and wrong, according to one study, but they just don't care. So that's a tricky situation. So you don't want that, but you also want to try to find people who are highly engaged and who really want to commit themselves to your organization. And so we'll look at some of the tools that you can use to do that. Also, we'll consider the legal implications of how difficult it can be sometimes if you hire the wrong person, letting them go. Because in our country, in the United States, we have a lot of wrongful termination lawsuits, and people, if they're let go, even if it's for performance, sometimes they'll say it's really for other reasons, like you're discriminating against my group or something like that. And so it can be very difficult. Human resource departments oftentimes make it very difficult for people to let other people go for not performing because they're worried about lawsuits. And so that can be a tricky situation. In the United States, all states except for Montana are what they call at-will states, meaning that you can hire and fire at will at your discretion. But that has to be in the absence of some discriminatory reason. And so unfortunately, we see a lot of these discrimination claims, and some of them probably truly are based on discrimination because we haven't gotten rid of some of the racism that we still see plaguing much of the world. Another issue that we want to make sure is we find these motivated and productive people. So according to the Society of Human Resource Managers, a hiring mistake could cost up to 5 times the bad hire's salary. So that's a lot. So here's what you want to find. You want to find the highly engaged employees. And we're going to look at some different tools that you can use to identify those people right in the hiring process. This poll from Gallup, every year they come out with a poll and the numbers are always right around these same numbers. So this is in the United States. Only 30% of employees are considered highly engaged. 53% are moderately engaged and 17% are actively disengaged with malicious intentions. It's pretty rotten to have that in your organization. And so what you want to do is find the highly engaged employees. Now, these numbers vary around the world. I haven't seen Brazil's numbers for what this would be for engagement. I have seen France's, and in France, it was about 3% of people are highly engaged. So that's really low. So you want to, unfortunately, they'd want to really find those 3%. So the question is, what do you do to attract these people? There are some companies like Zappos who do a fantastic job of recruiting and attracting highly engaged people. And what is Zappos? Zappos has started off as an online shoe company, and it's expanded into a number of other products. But their whole message, everything about them revolves around the goals or the mission of happiness and wow. They want to communicate that. It starts right at the beginning. They make sure they hire people who have the right kind of personalities to work in customer service, because a lot of them are in a call center. And they just started off, they have a 6-week training program. After you go through the program, they'll pay you if you want to leave. Sometimes they'll give you $2,000 to leave because they just want to make sure they get the most highly committed people possible. And then there's the idea of Vail Ski Resort. They have this idea of reimagining the mountain experience. They want to deliver the experience of a lifetime. And they recognize their employees for making a huge difference each day. And then they single them out, take pictures of them, employee recognition programs. Those are really important. And employees even nominate one another for epic service or promise or safety or a legacy of Vail awards. So they can identify each other, which ones really stand out. And so Vail is also one of those very happy places to work where you probably have more people who are more engaged. So here in the United States at my school, I'm in the Sykes College of Business at the University of Tampa. One of the things that we really care about is we're looking at our students. We're student focused and we focus on teaching excellence. And it doesn't mean we don't do research. We definitely appreciate research, but we only want to hire people who are very much committed to their students. And so what we do is we try to screen people in the selection process to figure out which ones are more focused on their research, where the students are just a little sidebar, or which ones are going to really impress students in the classroom. And we want to find those people. So everything that we do, performance evaluations, compensation, tenure and promotion, everything centers around teaching excellence. It's the biggest component of our performance evaluations are what our teaching scores are. That's very important for us. So they say hire for fit. So they say hire for attitude, train for skills. That is a common mantra. And so we want to think about relevant business scenarios. You can ask people, sometimes you can give people personality assessments, but you can also just look at the idea of giving people scenarios in an interview and asking them how they'd respond. So if you're wanting to find somebody who's very good in customer service, if you want to use that as an example, or you can look at somebody who'd be very good as a server or a waiter, you can try to figure out ways to identify those people by telling them a scenario that might happen. How would you handle an irate customer? How have you handled an irate customer? Look at those sorts of things. And don't be afraid if you see someone you've got one employee who's been at your company for a really long time, but you hire a somewhat new, promising superstar. Don't be afraid to leapfrog or go past the person who's been with the company for a really long time to really go after that talent, because a lot of times you hire talent who won't want to stick around for a long time if you're just married to a system of promoting people just because they've been at the company for a long time, but even though they aren't performing very well or they're just sort of mediocre. So if you ask yourself this question, if you're in the group right now, think about that. What are the characteristics of the ideal job candidate? And how do these align with your company's vision, mission, goals, and values? So think about that. And then think about what are the characteristics of people you've hired in the past who didn't work out very well? And how could you have identified those characteristics in the hiring process? Then the last question just to think is, do you use 90-day probationary periods? So if you hire someone, you let them, in the first 90 days, they're on probation. You haven't definitely given them a more permanent position until after they go through this sort of 90-day process of checking them out and seeing how well they work with you. A lot of times you'll find people sometimes end up being somewhat mediocre. So here's a book called High Velocity Hiring by Scott Wintrip. And he says he looks for these different things when he's trying to figure out which employees to hire. He says there's the deal makers, and he thinks about skills, experiences, values, education, helpful behavior, personalities. What are the common assets of those who've done very well at your company? So put that into a box. And then think about what are the common deficits of people who haven't succeeded. So what are those unhelpful behaviors or the values that they have or negative attitudes and personalities or counterproductive work behaviors? And then think about other boosts, top performer assets. What are the things that people have? And then other deficits. What are the mediocre performers coming in at? And then think about listing your job descriptions and qualifications accordingly. And then consider experiential interviews where you get people involved and maybe performing a little bit on the job. So Jim Collins, he's got a really good book called Good to Great, and he talks about level 5 leaders. And these are people who not just have professional will, but they've also the will to succeed or the desire to succeed. They also have the personal humility. And that's something that sometimes we don't see enough of with leaders. We definitely see our egotistical leaders, but finding those who are actually humble, that's pretty important. He says at stage 2, he's looking at disciplined thought. So you confront the most brutal facts about your organization with data, facts, and evidence to assess its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What can you be your best at? And then he says we should do disciplined action. People don't have jobs. Just say they have responsibilities. And then the fourth thing is build greatness to last. So adhere to what your company's core values are and then make changes on everything but those. It's really very important to have a purpose. It's not what you do, it's why you do it. There's a person called Simon Sinek, and he does a lot of leadership videos. Sinek is how he spells his last name. He commands major money to come and do presentations. I believe it was around, we tried to contact him, and I believe the number was something like for a morning presentation was going to cost us $100,000. But he says, start with why. Why do you do what you do? TED Talk from Dan Pink, he says that people talk about motivating people through money a lot, those extrinsic motivators, but he says the real way to motivate people to perform or to even identify people and keep them around is those who feel they have a purpose in the company. They're doing something that makes a difference to other people. They've got a grand purpose. Also, people who have what they feel high levels of mastery. They don't feel like they're being micromanaged. Instead, they feel like they have control over their environment and what they do each day. And they have freedom. They have autonomy. That's also very important to motivating people. So level 5 leaders, if you have these really good leaders, they have that professional will and they're humble, you want to put them in your powerful positions and you want to create a culture where you do that. So this is just a link to a diagnostic tool by this person who wrote the book I just referenced, Jim Collins. And you can go in there and you can grade yourself on where you stand on this whole process. So you can see questions like the leaders who sit in the most powerful seats practice the window and the mirror. They point out the window to people and factors other than themselves to give credit for success. But when they have failures, they look in the mirror. So grade yourself. Once a decision is made, do people unify behind you? Remember that a lot of times if you're in a company and the company's coming together and making decisions on different things. Like, for example, here at the University of Tampa, years ago, we decided to go from a 3-credit model to a 4-credit model with our classes. And there were some people who were very resistant to that because they were worried about having less opportunity to teach elective courses. But once the decision was made that we were going to go to the 3-credit model, everyone unified behind it. This was now the time to move forward and not look back. We have to move forward. And a lot of times you want to make sure you've got that culture in place also, because that's one way to also retain people. So according to Jim Collins, he says, we are rigorous in our selection for getting new people on the bus. We invest substantial time in evaluating each candidate with at least 3 selection tools. So they're looking at people's references. They might even test them, like, for example, personality tests or intelligence tests. You want to do that. My sons just applied for jobs. They're teenagers, and they just applied for a job at the Home Depot, which is the store that carries a lot of home goods. And they had to go through a very rigorous personality profile test. And they haven't gotten a phone call yet, so that's a little bit of a bummer. But maybe something happened in that personality test where they didn't have exactly the right fit. If you go through the interview process and you find that, geez, it just doesn't seem like this selection pool has really anybody halfway decent, don't hire anybody. Do not be afraid to not fill the position. It's worse off if you bring the wrong person in. It'll be hard to get that person to go if suddenly it really becomes evident that they're not performing very well. And so you want to also retain people. And again, going back to the retaining of people, thinking about the motivations and the purpose and those sorts of things. What kind of environment are you creating? Are people backstabbing each other? Are they saying nasty things and gossiping a lot? You want to make sure you don't have that kind of an environment. And you do that by hiring the right people in the first place. So first ask who. Get the right people on the bus, the right people in the right seats, and get the wrong people off the bus. Okay, so put who before what. So think about from the consideration of what we should do to who would be the right person to take responsibility for this. So look around your company, find out who the people are who other people are looking up to. Who are the people that people admire in your company? And identify those people and put them in positions of power. And also consider, once you have people in these positions and they're doing a really good job, pay them, and even pay them much more than maybe you pay other people who are doing a more mediocre job. A lot of companies don't do that. They don't differentiate the pay of really high performers very much from people who are performing at a much more mediocre level. And then think about generations. Now, this is something that I just found. I mentioned this briefly to Andre before we started, but think about the idea that you're shaped a lot of times the way that you are and what your views are and your values. A lot of times that's shaped when you're younger, in your teens. That's in the socialization period. And a lot of times it's your political outlooks and your societal norms might be shaped by that. So I came through the 1980s. And so my period here in the United States was very much shaped by presidents like Ronald Reagan. He was a president that everyone loved back then. And we were shaped by pretty conservative views back then, because that's how the 1980s were here in the United States. And so we've studies have been switching out generations and just looking at different types of people. And you can see the names of these generations here. The traditionalists, that's an older generation. The baby boomers, it was a big generation of people who came about after World War II. My generation, which is Generation X, then Generation Y, or the millennials, and Generation Z, and those are the most recent. And so in this study, what we found was the younger generations, now this speaks to my own kids, so I'm trying to figure out why this is, but they're very focused on the idea of individual choices, bodily autonomy. When they're considering moral matters, they're less likely to be patriotic, less likely to consider God important, and more likely to justify ethically, sometimes questionable things like abortions, prostitution, homosexuality, avoiding fare on a public transport, stealing property, cheating on taxes, accepting a bribe. They're more likely to justify those. And so we looked at why that is. And we looked at what they call moral foundations theory. And in that theory, it's interesting. There's political differentiators. The younger generations tend to be a little more liberal and more tolerant. And that the liberal people, they found in another study, are very focused on care, especially care for the needy and care for the poor, and fairness as opposed to cheating, or care as opposed to harm. Very focused on those. People who are more conservative tend to focus more evenly across all of these different dimensions that also add in liberty versus authority, sanctity, loyalty, and again, that's also, I've got authority, I guess, twice there, but the idea of patriotism also is in there. So they're more focused on that. And then there are people who are what they call libertarians, and they tend to be very much focused on care, harm, fairness, and liberty. They like all of those. How does that play out? It plays out with people's how you can motivate people. For example, when Joe Biden was running for president, one of the things that he did was he focused on caring for the needy, because the liberals tend to really focus on care and fairness. And when Donald Trump was running for president, and also through his campaign, a lot of times we'd see all kinds of he would go to these events and there would be American flags flying everywhere. He'd have the military come in, because people on the right in our country tend to really focus on authority and the idea of patriotism and loyalty and those sorts of things. And so Trump capitalized on that. In your country, you could probably say Bolsonaro would probably be doing things that are trying to appeal to loyalty. So when you're picking out people, you want to use what we have in the United States, these uniform guidelines on selection procedures. But what we do is there's all these different tools that you use: cover letters, weighted application blanks, resumes, interviews, references, background checks. We just use that. When we say they're validated, what we mean is that they've been shown to predict performance. So that's the deal. And so here you can see some other selection tools that can be used. I'm not going to run through all of these, but I'll just say one of them, I'll just go to the top, one of the top ones. Work sample, you have a person, say if a person's going into work in marketing, they might give you a sample of what they've done to create job ads, or I'm sorry, company ads. So they give you some examples of their previous ads. Intelligence, general mental ability, that predicts performance across all jobs. So it's not a bad idea to collect intelligence tests and to see that. You can see right here the correlations at 0.51. What you do to get what they see the dimension, the R square, you'd square that. And so you can see it's predicting around 25% of somebody's performance. But of course, what's the other 75%? We have other factors that are really important. So things like honesty, conscientiousness, those sorts of things. So those are just some different kinds of tests. These are valid, these different intelligence tests or cognitive ability, just another way to say a very similar thing, math, verbal, spatial. A lot of studies have been shown that link, for example, your ACT or your SAT scores, if you guys get that standardized aptitude test, with your grade point average later in school, which is why a lot of schools use intelligence tests. Then there's the personality test. You can just see right here, the way I've got this set up, it's kind of funny, but leadership, the highest correlate of leadership is extroversion, according to a meta-analytic study, which means a person really is very sociable, likes to be around other people. And then the highest predictor of job performance is conscientiousness. So that's a person who's very motivated to do a good job for the company. And then you have also job satisfaction. Extroversion, again, comes in very high, and neuroticism, which is emotional stability, that is the opposite of emotional stability, that also comes in high. So emotional stability is linked very highly with job satisfaction. Neuroticism, which is anxiety or worry, that is a negative relationship. And so then there are other tests that you can give people. Now, Andre's very familiar with the dark triad, so I thought I'd put that in this slide. So the idea of psychopathy or Machiavellianism, these are negatively related to performance. It's counterproductive work behaviors. Then another study that is out there is core self-evaluations. What is a person's belief in himself or herself? Do they feel like they have a lot of control? Do they have high levels of neuroticism, or the opposite? In that, we're looking at emotional stability. And then you can do things like situational judgments. Find out what people are interested in. So the bottom line is, if you want to enhance employee engagement, productivity, job satisfaction, job performance, and other positive outcomes, consider spending time identifying the right employees up front, and consider your organization's mission, vision, and goals, and then match people to it. Make sure that the tools you use are validated. There are tools like handwriting analysis that has zero validity, but some companies even use it. And then make sure that you've got your mission, vision, and goals sort of integrated throughout the whole process for retaining and hiring and retaining your employees. And that's all that I have for now. So I guess I can stop sharing this window, I think.
Yes.
So let me come back to.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Stephanie. Thank you for your presentation. It was amazing. I have a few questions just for us to break the ice. Based on your presentation, we saw that top talent is not very easy to attract, right? Some companies may use the wrong tools or not the necessary amount of tools necessary for that specific position, let's say. And I assume that once you attract this top talent, to keep him or to keep her in your organization is even harder. So what would be some general tips to keep top talent within the organization? For instance, some authors state that writing attractive job descriptions would be a strategy to attract top talent. Mm-hmm. However, if the job description is not compatible with the real job characteristics, let's say, you may end up hiring this top talent, but it will be unlikely that you will keep him or her, right? So I'd appreciate if you could comment on that.
Yeah, you want to make sure you have, there's a few different strategies, but one is you want to make sure you have a very strong corporate culture, that you have the right kind of environment where people are happy to work there and they feel that they're in the right place. And so you just want to make sure that you've got that. You can do that by recognizing your employees and calling them out. If in the United States, we tend to be very individualistic. So we love it when our bosses call us out and tell us that we did a good job and then put our picture up in the Employee of the Month profiles and do things like that. We tend to really like that kind of stuff. And we like it when people make it so that you're getting together also in friendships with the people with whom you work. And so we want to develop those friendships by having after work events sometimes where company sponsored events, parties, things like that. So you want to make sure that people get to know one another. And you might even have where you send them off for a day. Instead of going to work, they go to Top Golf and they do a little team building. And so that's also a nice approach to get people to just to like their coworkers. Because if you have a lot of friends in your workplace, you're less likely probably to move on to another workplace unless you
Yeah.
get an amazing offer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, team buildings is a very common strategy used here in multinational companies in Brazil. I really like that. Thank you. Just one more question, Professor. Based on common sense, at least here in Brazil, pay level would be the most important way to attract top talent. We hear a lot that a salary is not enough to keep an employee, but at least here in Brazil, it is still the most important fact or the most important strategy. So, is that really true based on scientific studies, or does that vary according to other variables such as type of job or maybe the position, right? Managerial positions versus non-managerial positions. Is that really true that pay level plays the most important role in this scenario?
I know it plays an important role, but it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy, where you have at the bottom, once you have a job that can cover your food and your shelter and those basic needs, now you start getting into what you want out of purpose. And so you get this idea of self-actualization at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, saying, I want to do things that I'm giving back, I'm making a big difference in the world. Those sorts of things are very important. And so the intrinsic motivators are more important after you've gotten the person there. And after a while, once people are able to pay their basic bills and they're comfortable, if I'm making $100,000 or I'm making $110,000, it's not going to make that much of a difference because I can cover my
Yeah.
basic bills.
Yeah,
So
you're right. What about country differences, Professor? Uh, could I say that the strategies used in the United States would work here in Brazil, for instance, or in India or China, etc.?
I think from the Brazilians that I've met, and I know this is sort of anecdotal, but from the Brazilians that I've met, every year a bunch of Brazilian executives from FGV come to our campus and stay with us for about a week. And from what they've told me and the way they've been, I would say we probably share a lot of very similar views on purpose and those kind of important things. So I would
Okay.
say it does apply.
Okay. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
Guys, would anyone like to participate with questions or comments? Please just click on the raise your hand button on the top of your window. I'd appreciate if you could participate in the discussion, guys. Okay, we have here Samuel. Samuel is very welcome in our discussion. He's talking, if I'm not mistaken, directly from Dublin, Ireland. So
Oh,
Samuel, please feel free to make your comment or question.
Hello, Professor Stephanie.
hi.
Hello, Andrea. I hope you are good. Um, one question. I saw at the beginning of your presentation one phrase, one statement that I saw, by the way, this week, saying that hire for attitude and not for skills. But could be how is this in in actually, uh, if you don't have the skills, you should be that one person, that annoying person asking for the job, insistently. I guess this is the word.
Hmm. I think it depends. Actually, there should be probably a little bit of a caveat for that because at very high levels in positions, you would want somebody who's coming in who's been able to perform in that type of a job before. So there are some skills that would be definitely prerequisites for those higher level positions. But for maybe the lower level positions, especially entry level positions or those kind of things, just finding the candidate who has the right attitude, rather than, like, for example, if I'm hiring somebody to come in and work in customer service, I want to try to find somebody who's just very friendly with other people. And maybe they haven't worked in customer service in the past, but I can bring them in and put them in those positions and train them on customer service, because you can't training on attitude, something that someone's developed for a couple dozen years maybe. Sometimes they just have a rotten attitude, and you're going to bring them in, and even though they have all the skills and they look really good on paper, their attitude is just toxic to the company.
Okay, maybe you choose that person for maybe some entry level, and maybe in the future you can just for that attitude train for a higher position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Samuel. That's a good point. We have here also a probatory period, Professor Stephanie, 3 months, which is 90 days, right? As you mentioned in your presentation. Would anyone else like to participate, guys? You don't have necessarily to have a question specifically, or you can make just a comment. Please feel free to participate.
Or share your story. If any of you have hired the wrong person at one time and it didn't work out very well, I certainly have. So it's very important to find the right, and we've hired some really good people too. So it's just.
Yeah, it's very common here in Brazil. We have in the selecting process, companies normally will do some tests, psychological tests. Of course, they're going to check out your resume, but sometimes they do some practical exercises or practical tests. Let's say behavioral tests, and it's even funny that some people will pretend to act like they know that the company expects them to act. So let's say that I don't like to work in groups, but if I'm being tested in this behavioral test, I will pretend that I'm a leader. I will pretend that I like to work in group. So it's hard sometimes. Sometimes I reflect about that. It's how could you avoid that, right? I think it's almost impossible that you avoid that people pretend to be somebody else, right? It's a challenge.
That is a huge challenge. It's under that impression management. So they're trying to make a good impression, and so they're modifying their own natural behavior. I think that's why the 90-day or 3-month probationary period is so important, because after they get a little bit more comfortable, maybe after a week or two, maybe you start seeing their true selves.
Yeah, you're right. André Luiz Alves just raised his hand. André, you are welcome to participate.
Okay, André. Thank you. Good afternoon, Professor Thomason.
Good afternoon.
I graduated last December at technology information, and I tried to find my first job. And I see that some companies are trying to hire a professional, for example, a junior professional, and they want a person or in a, that have high experience. Okay, they want a higher experience employer, but they want to pay a salary of a junior professional. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's always unfortunate when employers kind of try to lowball you in an organization. I think that's unfortunate. It's right now with the way that, at least I don't know what the job market's like in Brazil right now, but right now the job market's very tight here, and a lot of employers have had to pay a lot more than they traditionally have to attract people. And so if the job market's loose, if there's lots of people looking for a job and very few jobs available, then the employers can sort of lowball you. So how is the job market for that particular position? Are there a lot of people looking for those positions, or is there more area where it's more competitive? There are very few people looking, because I know that just, unfortunately, with supply and demand, employers do take advantage of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, I think that depending on the supply demand, I agree with you, Professor Thomason, that they may take advantage of that. At least here in Brazil, private universities, they will pay a doctor a master salary. So it's very common. So they want you to have a doctor's degree, but they will pay as if you just had a master's degree. So it's very common here in Brazil, in private universities especially. That's a pity.
It's tough, and it's one of the things that's so important when you go to get a job, and something that I hadn't done myself very much, and a lot of women, there's been studies on this, but negotiating a salary and just realizing what you're really worth. There are different sites you can go online. I know for the United States, I know there's a lot of sites where you can go to find out what the traditional pay is in those jobs, so that you have an idea of what you can expect, and then negotiating, just valuing yourself.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Even though we have also to take into consideration the fact that salary may vary across regions, at least here in Brazil, in the same job in a capital city, you will receive higher salaries than the same job in the country, let's say. You talked about intelligence tests, Professor, and its role in the selecting process. I reflect a lot about this intelligence tests because normally when we talk, for example, about IQ, intelligence coefficient, normally it's a very focused on a very quantitative focused test, right? And we know that there are other types of intelligence. So I have some inputs on that, because normally you may hire somebody who have a very high intelligence coefficient, but maybe this specific person does not have emotional intelligence, and you know that nowadays it's very important that employees are resilient, that they can stand pressure times, high workloads, for example. And sometimes you may have somebody who's very intelligent, but they do not know how to talk with people. They do not have interpersonal abilities. They do not know how to work under pressure. So are there other intelligence tests that besides the quantitative ones?
You have been making a really good point, because I would definitely never just rely on an intelligence test. That could be a component, but there should be a much bigger picture, because the motivations, the personality, I would recommend the 5-factor model of personality test, and look really closely at the scores on those different dimensions, because 3 of them are super important for a lot of things. If you look at conscientiousness, it's very important, because that shows a person's work ethic and how they value work, and how they want to achieve, and they want to do a good job for you. And then definitely think about also agreeableness. How well do they get along with other people, and is that required in this particular job? If you're hiring a lawyer, you want the opposite of agreeableness. You want someone who's more skeptical, or a judge. And then if you're looking at openness to experience, that person who, if you're going to send somebody abroad to travel into another culture, be important that they have high openness to experience. If they're sales, you want probably extroverts for that kind of a job. So those kind of things you might want to think about too. That's just one. There's lots of other personality factors.
The psychological tests are very important. And sometimes I think that here in Brazil, psychological tests are used mostly for you to avoid crazy people. And actually it plays a much bigger role, right? We can look into the details of these tests and adjust with the job description. You're right. We have here Bianca Cachoeira. Thank you, Bianca, for participating. Feel free to unmute your microphone.
Hi guys, good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi Professor. I was first of all I wanna say congratulations for your presentation. It was really great, and I have some points, and I don't know these numbers here in Brazil, but I was a little bit shocked with the numbers of people who are leaders and they are has a psychological not so good. So you said 3%, I guess, in France. I don't know here in Brazil. But how can we, the point is, how can we avoid these people if we are hiring someone, or if I am the colleague of someone who has this profile? How can I act like with these people?
It's hard because just like Andre pointed out too, it's hard trying to identify people in the interview sometimes, because if they do hide their true selves, and then going through and giving them personality tests and things like that. There's tests like on psychological entitlement. Those kind of tests might also be telling, and ethical tests. There's a lot of integrity tests that are out there, and that would be something that you might want to consider. And there's some tests where it's kind of disguised as far as what they're trying to get at in the test. And sometimes those are good to try to avoid people who fake their answers. So like, for example, if I take the 5-factor model of personality test, I know exactly which questions are going to measure my conscientiousness, and I'll max out those scores. Now that's gaming the system, because I know the system. And so it wouldn't be good to even give me that test. You have to go find another test to give me that I don't know what the items are. And so that's just something. But the personality tools, just being around the person. One of the things that Zappos does that I think is really good is when they have people go in for interviews, a lot of times they have a lot of other people involved in the process that the person being interviewed might not even realize. So they figure, how did this person treat the person who drove them here? How did the person treat the person at the front desk? Before you even get into the interview, because sometimes you'll see the true self in the treatment of maybe a person they perceive as in the lower level, and that'll come out. So Zappos actually follows them around and does that kind of thing. And I think that's pretty wise.
Thank you, Bianca. Samuel, did you
Thank
raise
you.
your hand again, or am I mistaken?
No, but I want to make another
Sure.
question.
Feel free.
When you said in your presentation, Professor, about remembered of something I saw in the Jordan Peterson's book. I assume you are familiar with Jordan Peterson's.
Oh, Jordan
And
Peterson. Yeah, I love Jordan Peterson.
yeah,
12 Rules for
he's
Life.
yeah, exactly. He says that he says that too, that very few people are responsible for the major part of the work of a group. And the way he says it seems to be the something of the humankind. Do you think we can avoid this scenario, or is it gonna be true for any organization?
Yes, he says he's using the Pareto principle, where he talks about 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work. Or if you look at how many people publish books, and then the very, very few that actually succeed in that. And so we do see that through everything. So you're right, because that sort of principle, if you can just figure out how you can identify the 20%, you could have a really strong company.
É o vermelho que tá manchando, né? Vai ter que trocar ele, moço.
Let me just unmute here. Let me just mute.
But I love Jordan Peterson's work. His 12 Rules for Life I think about a lot, because I think of the basic things that he says, like the really amusing. If you haven't read that book, you guys might want to read it, because he's got some funny things like lobsters.
Yeah. And there's 12 more rules for life he just released, right? I
haven't read that one yet.
Thank you,
Well,
Professor.
I like his thing. One of the things that he talks about, he says, tell the truth or at least don't lie. I think that's important. I pay a lot of attention to what happened in the last century in the USSR and China and Cambodia, and how a lot of people were sort of propelled into lying and just not telling the truth. And he said Solzhenitsyn's advice on that was always to at least don't lie. Don't repeat a lie if you know that it's a lie. And so that's so important too, even in today's climate with some of the things going on politically.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Samuel. Would anyone else like to participate? Guys, just click on raise your hand button. Uh, uh, okay, Luis, please feel free to unmute your microphone.
Just a sec. Hi, Professor Stephanie,
Hi.
and hi, Professor Andre. I wanna know, in your opinion, Professor Stephanie, how the worldview can affect the manner how a corporation can choose an employee, and how the different points in worldview and concordant points can affect the way of living in a corporation, and if this thing is good, or if it is a bad thing, or something related to this. If you can make some comments, I would be glad on this topic, please.
A lot of times that's if you have a strong culture and you have a mission and driving people that way. I would actually really encourage corporations to try to hire people of all different worldviews, because I think if you end up you're hiring everyone, say if you're a liberal and you have a very liberal political philosophy, and maybe you're in one particular religion and you only want to hire people in that one particular religion, you're going to end up with everybody walking in lockstep and you won't have enough diversity of opinion. And so I think opening it up in our country, when we hire people, you're protected from being discriminated against based on your race, religion, color, national origin, or gender identity, or sexual orientation. You're protected against discrimination, but you're not protected against discrimination based on your political views. And these days, with everybody on social media pretty much saying what they think, companies have been using that against them if they disagree with the person's political view. And unfortunately, in these at-will states, you can get released from your company if they disagree with your political view, because you don't have any protections in that area in my country. But I would highly advise companies to try to find people of varying views, because how can you, if you get even a bunch of conservatives in a room or a bunch of liberals in a room, and you don't understand the other's point of view, you're going to operate sort of in one zone without fully getting people's diverse opinions and backgrounds. And so I don't know if that answered your question. Did that?
It's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a very nice question. I was curious about how would you select different people with different worldviews in the military, for example. We assume that they will prefer to select conservatives, let's say, and I think that depending on the type of organization, they may they may have some privileges with specific worldviews, but I agree with you that in general, if you select different people with different worldviews, that would be more strategic, let's say.
I can say in the military in our country, just really quickly, we've been having a hard time in the military in our country getting people. They've been complaining about that recently. And
really?
The military traditionally does a lot of marketing and gets a lot of people from the South in our country, where there are many more Republicans or conservative people than there are Democrats and liberals. And so and a lot of people who, I live in a neighborhood that's about 1/4 military, and almost everybody in my neighborhood would be considered Republican or conservative. It's very much that's because the military people tend to be that way. And so I don't know if it's self-selection, they're just the ones going for the jobs in the first place, or if it just happens to be that the recruiting's taking place down in the South the most. I'm not sure.
Wow, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. Wow. Uh, uh, just one curiosity, out of curiosity, Professor. In your presentation, you mentioned that at the University of Tampa, specifically at John Sykes College of Business, where you work at, you tend to select professors who are very excellent on teaching, right? You don't pay much attention to research, let's say. Here in Brazil, during the selecting processes at our universities, they try to find professors who present a balanced amount of abilities between teaching, extension, research. So what would be like the selecting process, specifically at John Sykes College of Business? Do you have a teaching exam, a writing exam? What is it like?
That's a good question. I should say we do focus on research too, because you have to be considered a scholarly academic to keep up with our AACSB accreditation. So you do have to do certain level of research, but you don't have to do a bunch of A+ publications as far as the journals.
Okay.
So that's sort of where it's at. But the teaching, we have people they have to teach in front of our students for a half hour, whatever topic related to the class. So it's a topic in their field, in their discipline that's related to the class. So they have to do that presentation, which is sort of the work sample. And then we actually have them do a research presentation too. So they share their research with us, and we can see if their research, what level of thought they've put into that, and if they seem like they have some potential, because we could lose our accreditation if people stop researching. So it is important that you research. It's just that you don't have to research in the A+ journals.
That's nice. That's good to know. Specifically with respect to the teaching in front of the class. Here in Brazil, normally you will be notified about the topic that you're going to teach with a 24-hour notice. So if I know the topic that I'm going to have to present now, tomorrow at this specific time, I will be presenting this topic. How long, what is the time previously that the person knows what they're going to talk about?
24 hours is tough. Because we tell them about at least a week or two in advance.
Oh, really?
Yeah. As soon as we know we're scheduling we tell them right up front. We'll say, you're going to teach in a human resource management class, so pick your topic and bring it in there, but it has to be in the human resource area.
So you are the one to pick your topic.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Here in Brazil, they choose randomly one topic out of 10. And in 24 hours, you will have to present this topic. Of course, all those topics are related to one specific field, right?
Mm-hmm.
But different topics. So you are not the one to choose this specific topic. So it's good to know. So would it be like the same in public universities in the US? Okay.
It is. It is. Yeah, same idea. I sat in on some interviews at Florida Atlantic when I was down there. So
nice. Interesting. Would anyone else like to participate, guys?
actually, wait a minute. Let me back that up. At Florida Atlantic, now that I think about it, we did not do it. They did not do a teaching. They didn't do any teaching. They just did their research. Now that I think about it, it wasn't.
Okay,
and
but you had to present, right?
You had to present your research, but you didn't have to teach a class.
I see.
Because when they teach a class at my school, the students also evaluate them on pencil and paper and then turn that evaluation in.
Wow.
It's tough. It's very, very stressed. I mean, I was pretty stressed. I remember I was kind of a little shaky even when I came in.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that the students would be able also to evaluate the class. That's interesting. Very nice. Would anyone else like to participate, guys, with comments or questions? So,
such good questions today. Everybody had such good questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. That's excellent. So guys, if the discussion is great, if we don't have any further questions, I would like to thank again everyone for participating. Thank you again very much, Professor Stephanie Thomason, for your presentation, for accepting so kindly my invitation. And the next webinar, guys, will take place probably in September or maybe August, and it will be announced soon. So thank you very much, guys, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.